When we talk about people development in organizations, you always tend to focus on skill development for the individual contributors and the top, the leadership development. But there's a very important layer in between these two, which is the managerial layer, which is often ignored when it comes to development. So what makes a good manager or an effective manager, and how can we train someone to be a good manager? Let's close the loop on this one. Joining me on Close the Loop is Veena Satish, the head of HR for MoEngage. Veena, welcome to Close the Loop.
Thank you, Srini. Thanks for having me here.
So, off the bat, let me ask you this question. Are managers really the forgotten employees of an organization with so much focus on the top and the bottom?
I don't believe they have completely been forgotten. Yes, there is kind of a prioritized focus upon the top management as well as on the bottom, but I completely don't agree with the fact that the managers lot have been forgotten. It's a crucial role in any organization because they are the ones who help us connect the dots in terms of moving towards a goal. So companies do realize it, do appreciate it, but however, is the only theoretical approach in terms of training them and scaling them up in an organization is good enough is a question that we need to think about. Yeah.
And I think there's also this thought process that do we really need managers? Like, can't we just make do with team leads who manage the day to day? And when it comes to larger things like appraisals, promotions, they can make recommendations, and a BU head or a more senior person can take the call. Like, is there a shift in thinking there as well?
Yeah, it's highly possible to have the leadership involved directly in the performance appraisals and promotions and those aspects of it. In fact, that approach promotes a lot more transparency and builds in a better relationship between the ICs and the leaders. So the advantages of it are there, certainly there, and I wouldn't deny the fact. And you could always leverage the team leads who are more kind of technical experts or to bring in that attribute in terms of the contributions of individuals and feed in that information to the leaders. But having said that, is that even a scalable model? For this model to be effective, it's important for the leaders to be very hands-on. Are they willing to kind of spend that much of a time in coaching, mentoring, guiding people? And do they have the bandwidth to understand the weakness and the strengths of individuals? So that it becomes more personalized, appraisal process. Otherwise, it's got no meaning, right?
Yeah, because we've spoken on the show about how not everyone's cut out to be a manager and how you pretty much take the best player and you just make them a manager. And have you seen instances where people have just been promoted to being managers when they're not really ready for it?
Yeah, we keep seeing that on a daily basis. And it's a general tendency that if somebody is strongly delivery oriented, it becomes important to promote them and so on. And we have seen that in every walks, right? So it is very important for you to kind of prepare them and then kind of promote them into the managers and into a managerial role rather than having them just move up completely based on their deliveries. So in one of the previous companies I worked for, in fact, we had a very experiential way of transitioning people from ICs into a managerial role, right? So we actually gave them a dummy team to manage for a period of about 3 to 6 months, alongside, of course, some typical learning.
Was this a
modules.
large organization that you were part of?
This was a large organization, obviously. And feedback played a crucial aspect there. So with all these things, only then they qualified to become a manager.
Yeah. So it brings us back to the question that we started with, right? So now we've realized that not everyone can be a manager, but okay, that's the reality of the game, that you might have to promote people who are not quite ready. But is there an understanding of what makes an effective manager? So at least you have a benchmark?
Every organization defines its manager effectiveness in a very different way and assesses it also very differently. Right? So the metrics and the evaluation that happens on manager effectiveness also can vary drastically. But having said that, there are certain set of universal competencies which by and large most of the organizations align with. Like typically, if you look at the goal setting process or the goal achievement process in terms of how capable one is to achieve his or her own goals and how can they drive that towards the team. It could be about the communication skills. How good is one person about the communication skills? How can they manage in terms of expectation setting or even delivering the feedback or even managing any kind of issues that the team comes up with? Can you get the diverse perspective and align them all together? Right, and it's also about how employee engagement you can kind of manage. Right, are you able to create that positive work culture? Are you able to make it more inclusive for people?
Right. So that's a whole lot of competence.
Absolutely. So I mean, the list goes on, honestly, as I said. But those are the things that are widely accepted. Even if you look at some of these managerial effectiveness trainings that are available, largely focuses on these competencies, right? And that's how they get measured, right? So, so that's where.
But do managers today realize that they need to have all these competencies? Is there a general level? Like, of course, you as a HR leader knows that this is required, but you pick an average manager out there, does he or she know that, okay, I need to build these competencies? Is there like a technical engineer will know that I need to learn these skills. But does a manager really know what they need to learn?
So in large companies again, or in a company which is very well process driven, people do know in terms of what they're expected of and so on. However, the weightage is not defined very significantly in every company, right? But in smaller companies, obviously, there is no definition of these competencies too. So there is still a large population out there still believe that manager effectiveness is all about delivery and getting things done. Right? So there is that strong belief.
And in all fairness, that's what their leadership also cares about.
That's all they care about, right? So that is what it matters for them. So that's where is the gray area, and it continues to remain for a very long time that way, unfortunately.
And today, when companies budget for development, I know that people development budgets are there, L&D budgets are there. How much of it is really dedicated to managers, if you leave aside those certifications and all?
Right. Again, kind of varies from companies to companies and so on. There are organizations who dedicate exclusive budgets for for manager effectiveness and so on. Again, I personally am not a very big fan about only the training aspect and theoretical aspects of it, because I don't say that they don't get me anything, but it has its own place, no doubt about it. But that's where it gets a lot of times left out. It's important for you to take it one notch above in terms of see how that learning has been deployed or has it been carried from an experience standpoint, right? So there are many other ways and means where you can kind of utilize those, and I personally believe that that's where it helps the manager to grow better rather than just going through some classroom training traditionally.
And of course, you mentioned that in larger companies, it's a little bit better because even if the manager is not attuned to it, somebody is there to tell them that, listen, this is where you're lacking and you need to. But how do you solve for a relatively smaller organization? I know you work for a growing company. I work for a growing company. How do you solve it for smaller companies?
So it's an interesting theory. Smaller companies, one of the attraction factor is also about giving them higher roles, right, and higher titles. And many times we promote them oriented towards delivery and so on. So it's a huge change management process exercise, honestly speaking. You need to really have your leaders help them understand in terms of why is it important not to keep growing somebody in the manager effectiveness unless they're clear. And it is also used as a retention strategy today, right? If you look at smaller organizations, there is a manager 1, manager 2, manager 3. Nobody knows what they do. Right? So it's a good.
And what does it even mean? What is it?
It's a feel-good factor for an individual, honestly speaking. But what leaders don't understand by doing this is it's only a band-aid approach. Right? It's not going to sustain for long.
That's right.
It's important for us to define. It's important for us to focus upon as you kind of grow and scale the organization. It's very important for you to set aside certain, importance towards manager effectiveness. So I think the first and foremost, you need to get into a practice of setting certain specific ARAs, driving and also defining certain metrics to measure them and show how it kind of aligns to the larger scheme of things.
Along those 7-8 dimensions that you...
Absolutely. So it's very important to do that, and that's a huge mind shift change.
Right? And I think in the past there used to be this concept called, I don't know if it's there anymore, called the people manager. So this is largely from the IT services world, where you had a functional reporting, like day-to-day work-related. Delivery was you're the person that you reported to. But you had someone else who was not in your org at all, who dealt with all the other stuff. So do you think there is potential for that to make a comeback today?
I think that is changing. At least in the tech industry, it is significantly changing, right? I mean, there are no more companies who are only having just sit and manage the people, right? There's nothing else you got to deal with and so on. Today's managers, by and large, are more like the techno-functional managers, right? But it still has a heavy weightage towards delivery, right? So, there are pros and cons of both these models that way. But I think where the organizations suffer is in terms of when there is no, as I said, weightage and the clarity that is provided on both these goals.
Correct.
So that's, I think it's still a long journey, honestly speaking.
The last point I want to touch upon with respect to managerial effectiveness is, we are a healthcare company, so we work with a lot of companies, and we understand that the health situation among corporate India, among the employees, is not so great because there's physical health, there's obesity, diabetes, hypertension is on the rise, mental health issues are on the rise, people are talking about it. And I feel like with this, with managers not being trained enough, they probably are not even being trained to even look for signs when someone is depressed, someone is anxious, someone has some other issues. So what have you seen in the industry there?
So the managers have to kind of equip themselves and adapt to change their leadership style, especially to manage the virtual teams, right? So it's very important on that. And, there is this saying called as, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So I would say in first place, it's important for the managers to take a step back and kind of figure out their mental well-being, because there is so much of an expectation and ask from the managers today. You have to manage the expectations of the higher-ups. You need to manage flexibility at the down. You need to manage bringing in positive work environment. You need to manage delivery. You need to manage, inclusivity. There's a whole lot of expectations. And you see there is more of burnout actually in the management layer.
That's right.
Right. So as I said, it's important for them to first of all take a step back, and which is impacting their productivity and collate themselves in their mental well-being, so that they can impart that. It's the first thing I think they should sit back and introspect in terms of what am I good at and what am I not good at.
That's right.
And be open and vulnerable, to the people in terms of saying that, hey, here is what I can bring onto the table. And there is this myth about if there is a manager, he should be the problem solver of the earth.
He knows, he has all the answers.
Yeah, you have all the answers, right? And you need to give me all the solutions. Which is not true. And even also managers have a tendency to be extremes, right? Either the way too controlling or the way too lenient.
That's true.
This is a balance that managers should constantly work and look about, and take a step back and do this. So people have to take time to step back to understand these new modalities.
And for the HR community that's tuning in to watch the show, what would be one or two things that you would tell them so that they can inspire their organization to give more attention to managerial effectiveness?
Right. So I think, there are so many programs and initiatives that are running today, and there is heavy focus on mental well-being and physical well-being, holistically as well-being per se, right? It's but there are organizations which again are doing it like a checkbox, right? So it's become so competitive, right? People do have identified need, but I think it is also deploying it, saying that, okay, X company is doing it, so I'm giving it to you, or Y company is doing it, I'm giving it to you. I would say, even if you give two things, which is fine, which is making more sense, it's important for you to recheck and see how is it making a difference in terms of the individuals as well as the company.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us on Close the Loop, Veena.
It was great talking to you, Srini. Thank you.
Thank you.